では、小島さんの紹介を簡単にします。小島さんは、コーネルテックの博士課程3年生で、孫正義育英財団の小学生でもあります。大学ではマルチモーダルシステムのためのインタラクティブな学習に興味を持って研究をされています。で、本日は、その関係の、研究を紹介してもらいます。では、お願いします。
はい。大谷さん、ありがとうございます。皆さん、今日はよろしくお願いします。So today, I'll be talking about the paper, Continual Learning for Grounded Language Generation by Observing Human Following Behavior. So this is a paper published in Title 2021 and also presented in EMNLP 2021. And this book is done in collaboration with Alan Sir and Yofatsi, my advisor. Both of them are from Cornell Tech, Cornell. And yeah, so let's probably get started. So basically in this book, we study a grounded instruction generation system, which you can think of as some function F. Function F takes two inputs, system's view of word state and system's intent, and F maps them to natural language instruction. We want to learn this function F. So in particular, we want to learn this function F by observing human behavior. In the scenario we are interested, a human and a system coordinate using natural language, and the system gives a human an instruction for delegating the task. So how do we learn such a system from human behavior? For instance, when the system tells you to do something, and it observes you are doing something different from system's intent, it can coordinate, the system can infer coordination failed, and the system can adjust how it generates instructions. So for more concretely, let's say the system has an intention of picking up a banana from the kitchen, but after generating some instruction and you observe human actually picking up apples instead of bananas, it can infer something negative about the instructions and vice versa. So this kind of learning from which we call observational signal is largely underexplored in previous literatures and something we focus in our work. So before diving into the gist of our talk, I'll give you an overview of our approach. But let me say, don't worry about the details here, because I'll come back to these details in the later slides. So in our approach, we first initialize the system with GPT-2 weights and a small amount of supervised data so that we can kickstart with minimally viable instruction generation model. And we deploy this model to interact with human users. The interaction happens in a round, and at each round, we sample instruction from the model and observe human users' behaviors to construct a data set. We aggregate training data at each round, which means we're going to have more data at later rounds, and we train the new model using this data with offline contextual Bandit algorithm. We deploy the new model for the next round of interaction, and we iterate this process. This is our learning approach. And I'm going to talk about the details in following slides. So something I want to highlight first is like we study this learning setup in a collaborative simulation game called Serial Bar. In Serial Bar, there are two agents collaborate in an environment, and their goal is to collect card sets in the environment so that they can score more points in the game. Two agents have different capabilities. One of the agents called the leader has the access to full observation of the world, while the other agent called the follower has only limited partial observability. Therefore, in Serial Bar, the leader is the one who makes a game plan and provide the follower unidirectional natural language instruction to play the game. In this project, we deploy the system as a leader and a human user as a follower. So let me make this setup complete by providing more tangible examples. Something I want to do here is I want to take you through an example in Serial Bar. So we are showing here how the learning process looks like for the human user as a follower. Basically, the user as a follower has a limited egocentric observability, which looks like this. And this demonstration shows how the user follows the model-generated instruction below. So let me probably show you some video, like how this stuff works. So basically in this turn, the model generated instruction, which is like turn right and go straight, pass a lake and collect the 3 blue circle card. So as the instruction says, the human follower first turn right and go straight. Then it observes the lake on the left-hand side. So the user just keeps going straight for a while. Then it finds like 3 blue circle card ahead. So the user just keeps going forward and eventually picks up the card. Yeah. So when the user finishes execution, the user pressed the finish command button over here to indicate the end of execution. Yeah. So when the user finishes execution, the user pressed the finish command button, and then then the user provide a short feedback to the system via 2 binary feedback questions. The first question is, did you follow all parts of leader's command and find everything correct? This is asking perceived correctness, meaning whether your execution completely align with the instruction. User answer this question by reviewing its execution. And in this case, the user answer yes to the question. Yeah, something I was talking about is that 2 binary feedback question. And there's like one more feedback question, which asks about the grammaticality. And in this case, the user also answers yes to the question because the instruction was grammatical. So once the user finishes answering 2 binary feedback questions, it receives another instruction from the system, and the interaction loops keeps going. So given this setup, how does the instruction generation system looks like in serial bar? Basically, input to the system is the leader's view of the game state, which looks like this. And the system's output is an instruction, which describes how the follower should move and also specify which cards they should select. Given the input, the system makes a plan of the target cards of the human follower and which path we want them to take. We use a determinist planner such as A-star search to do this. Then the system generates instruction from the game state and this path plan. So that was how the instruction generation system looks like in serial bar. After deploying the system to interact with a human, the data we get from this kind of interaction we can think about is a set of tuples. Over here, I denote a globe icon is a world state observed by the leader, and a map icon as a systems plan. And we have an instruction which we sample for our generation model. And we can also record user execution, which is the path, which is action performed by the human by following the instruction. And we have binary feedback questions about the perceived correctness and the grammaticality, as I demonstrated in the previous video. Something to note about the systems plan and the user execution is that we use the same representation for them, which are just a sequence of agent poses. And this allows us to treat them interchangeably when we process the interaction data in the later slides. Given this data, we compute reward by comparing the systems plan to the user execution. The intuitions here are, if the systems plan and the user's execution diverges, we know the instruction is not a good representation of the plan. However, the instruction can still be a good representation of user execution, even if execution is unrelated to system's intent. So more concretely, we have 3 heuristics to compute the reward from the interaction data. If the instruction is incorrect or grammatical based on 2 binary feedback questions, we infer the instruction is a bad instruction. So we pair systems plan with the word state and the instruction as a training example and assign the negative reward. If the instruction is correct and grammatical, we conclude the user execution reflects the instruction meaning well, and we use user execution as a training example by assigning the positive reward. In addition to this, If the systems plan and the user execution are roughly equal, we can say instruction accurately communicate the plan, and we can also use the systems plan as a training example by assigning the positive reward. So the type of training data we get creates something called contextual bandit scenario, which is probably the simplest form of reinforcement learning. A tuple word state, the sequence of follow pauses, is a context of a bandit, where the sequence of follow pauses can come either from a systems plan or user execution. We can think of instructions sampled from our model is a single bandit action decision. And each bandit decision gets reward of either positive one or negative one. Given this training setup, let me talk about our training objective. Our training objective is very simple, which is just to maximize the reward. Just to introduce the notation, we have state S, pause sequence row, instruction X, and the reward Y. The gradient of our objective is just reward multiplied by the gradient of instruction probability. And this behaves exactly like supervised learning for the positive examples. Things get a little bit more complicated when it comes to the negative examples. Intuitively, our objective wants the probability of negative instruction to be 0, and this causes exploding gradient for instruction probability term in our gradient. To prevent this issue, we use inverse propensity scoring from offline contextual bandit literature. The key idea here is we introduce coefficient L of Y to the gradient term. Coefficient stays 1 and does not do anything for positive examples. But for negative examples, the coefficient is inverse propensity scoring. The idea is that it reduces the importance of negative sample when the probability of negative instruction goes to 0, preventing the exploding gradient. This might be confusing. I'm happy to come back to this part later if anyone has any questions. But that's how our training objective works. So now that I talked about all the elements composing our approach, let me go back to this slide to kind of like recap our approach. So again, we start from initializing the model and deploy it to interact with human users. At each round, we sample instruction from the model and observe human users' behavior. We compile a bandit training data using heuristics to assign reward for each interaction tuples. And we aggregate training data at each round, and we train a new model from scratch by maximizing the reward, where we make training working by IPF's inverse propensity scoring coefficient trick. We deployed a new generation model for the next round, and the interaction loops keep going. This is our approach. Now let me talk about our experiments. So for our model, we use encoder. For our model for instruction generation, we use encoder-decoder architecture. We spatially encode the environment and treat the system plan as a sequence of vectors. We use GPT-2 as a decoder and shave off some layers to make it lighter. We condition the decoder with an encoder output via a technique called pseudo self-attention. I can provide more details if anyone has any questions about the model setup. Yeah, but that's going to be probably later. And for our experiments, we initialize a model using small amount of human-human interaction data. And each round of interactions, we evaluate the system via user task completion and a similarity of user execution to systems plan using Earth movers distance. For stopping criteria of model training, we resulted in a simple solution, which is just to train a model for the fixed number of variables and take the model at the end. This is likely suboptimal, but empirically, this criteria seems to work well. And the reason we resulted in this simple solution is in our setup, like we don't really have a good evaluation criteria so that we can we can just select the good model checkpoints. So for our main study, we deployed a system in 14 rounds of live user studies. So for each round, we deploy the model to interact with human users, evaluate the data through interaction, and collect the data to update the model, and we retrain the model and deploy the model back to the interaction. That's how it happens in this study. So basically, in this 14 rounds of live user studies, I'm showing here 2 metrics at each round. We want the task completion rate to go up and our movers distance to go down. Overall, the systems improves the task completion rate from 44.8% to 79.4% in task completion. And the user execution gets more similar to systems plan by reducing ask movers distance. This indicates the system relates intent better over rounds. And we also show that user adaptation to the system do not contribute to the system's improvement. We show this by taking the model at the first round and deploy it to play with the user at the last round. User at the last round are adapted to the systems very well. However, we observe the model task accuracy stays around 45%, which indicate the system did not improve from user adaptation. So for other metrics, the system simply gets better after 14 rounds of user interaction. User feels system is perceptually more correct, and the system at the later rounds corroborates better with human users by scoring higher in the game. We also find the significant changes in language generated by the model. The trend of language used by the systems becomes simpler and shorter. This is potentially the model is attuned to the task by dropping unnecessary information. But qualitatively, we also observe this phenomenon sometimes has side effects of oversimplifying instructions. Finally, we highlight some other experimental conclusion from the paper we didn't cover in this talk. So our error analysis reveals the system reduces various error categories like specifying incorrect cause or landmark overruns. These contribute to the system's improvement. Our study also showed the robustness of our learning signals across different learning designs. I guess I point you to our paper for more results, and I'm also happy to talk about more results in the later QA session. So basically, that's the end of my talk, and thank you very much for listening.